Tonight, you are not a visitor to the Middle Ages. You are a villager whose whole life is tied to the turn of the year, counting not months, but plowing days, harvest days, and hungry days. This is How Did Medieval Villagers Work, Eat, and Survive Through the Seasons, told one slow season at a time, from the first spring furrow to the last winter crust of bread. Tonight, you are not a hero riding out to save a kingdom. You are a tired villager at the very end of winter, lying on a straw mattress that has learned the shape of your body entirely too well. This is when the year really begins for you. Not on some date in a book, but in this uncertain space where snow has mostly gone, and the earth is more mud than frozen. And your stomach tells you more clearly than any calendar that the old year's food is almost gone, and the new year's food is still only an idea. You wake before the light is sure of itself. The house is a dim gray shape around you, edges blurred by smoke that never completely leaves, only thins. Your breath comes out in a pale cloud in front of your face. You can feel the cold on the tip of your nose, in your teeth, in the ache of your fingers as soon as they slip out from under the blanket. The wool over you is thin in all the places that matter. At your shoulders, where the threads have worn, at your hips, where you twist in your sleep, at your feet, where you have pulled extra scraps of cloth to cover the gaps. Straw pokes your skin where the ticking is torn, sharp reminders that this bed is nothing like the feather mattresses stories talk about. Around you, other bodies are beginning to stir. Someone coughs, a dry, tired sound that has been part of the house music all winter. A child nearby makes a small, complaining noise and tries to burrow deeper under shared covers. The air is thick with the smell of sleep, and old smoke and wool that has taken on the sweat and damp of months. You lie there for a moment longer, feeling the weight of your own tiredness, the way it sits not just in your limbs but in your thoughts. Then you push the blanket back because no one else will get up for you, and the fire will not coax itself awake. Your feet meet the floor, and it is like stepping onto stone that remembers ice. The packed earth or rough boards steal heat from you through the thin soles of your shoes or the calloused skin of your bare feet. You know every uneven place, even in this half-dark. The shallow hollow near the hearth, the snag in the floor by the chest, the loose stone near the door. The embers on the hearth are a dull, sulking red under their blanket of ash. You kneel there, joints stiff, and scrape carefully with the poker until a small, stubborn glow appears. You bend close, breath held for a second, then let it out slowly, feeding your own warmth to the nearly dead fire. It answers with the faintest deepening of color, then a flicker, then a thread of flame that licks at the splinters you lay over it. There is not much wood left. You know that by the too visible wall where the stack should be taller. Late winter is the season of counting, and you count without thinking now. How many days of fuel, how many loaves left, how many handfuls in each sack. You add one thicker stick, feeling the weight of the decision in your hand. Use too much and you will shiver more next week. Use too little and everyone will shiver now. The compromise is never satisfying, only necessary. Water has to be fetched. Even in the cold, it makes your fingers burn. You take the bucket, the handle worn smooth where many hands have gripped it, and step outside. The air bites harder out here, unsoftened by bodies and fire. The yard is a patchwork of slush and frozen ruts, last week's snow reduced to gray lumps, slick patches where yesterday's melt froze again. Your breath rises, joining the faint threads of smoke from other roofs. You are not the only one awake. Somewhere a rooster mutters, uncertain if it is time yet to shout at the world. A dog shakes, collar clinking, sending droplets of half-frozen water from its fur. The earth looks tired. The fields beyond the village are a dull brown under a thin wash of frost. All the crisp white of deep winter gone, but none of the green of true spring yet arrived. The path to the well is familiar, your feet finding the least treacherous route out of habit. At the well, the stones are slick with a thin skin of ice. The rope is stiff, resisting your grip as you lower the bucket down into the dark. The splash from below feels far away, almost imagined. When you pull the bucket back up, the weight drags at your arms, the cold seeping through the wooden handle into your bones. A thin fringe of ice clings to the rim where water kisses the morning air. Back inside, the contrast between the raw outside and the smoky inside is sharp, but not as sharp as you wish. The fire has caught enough to be a presence rather than a memory, a small orange core pushing back the gray. You set the bucket down, the slosh of water loud in the close room. Breakfast, such as it is, must be made. You lift the cloth from the bread and see what you already knew. The loaf is smaller than you would like, the crust thicker, the inside dense and dark. This is not fresh harvest bread. This is late winter bread, dragged out, stretched, mixed perhaps with things that are not grain at all. Your knife saws through it with more effort than finesse, each slice measured by eye in a way that is almost automatic now. You know without thinking who needs a slightly larger piece, whose work today will demand more from their muscles, whose growing bones complain louder. What is left is not generous. You scrape the pot from last night, loosening the clinging layer of porridge, adding enough water to turn it back into something that can be warmed and eaten. If you are lucky, there is a handful of oats to throw in. If not, you rely on the ghosts of yesterday's meal to flavor this one. As the thin mixture warms, the first green of the year sits in your memory rather than your pot. Soon, perhaps, you will go to the hedges and ditches to gather nettles, dandelion leaves, any wild green that can be boiled into the pottage to make it thicker, fresher, less like eating the same day over and over. For now, it is still mostly water and grain, a small, quiet promise to your stomach that there will be something inside it before you go out. When you eat, it is with the kind of attention that comes more from scarcity than from pleasure. The bowl warms your hands, and that warmth is almost as important as the contents. The porridge is bland, smoke-flavored, a little sour from the starter that gives your bread life. The bread itself strains your teeth, the crust rough against your gums, the crumb heavy. You chew anyway, because each mouthful is another few strokes of the hoe later, another length of field walked behind the plow. Outside, the light is growing, a pale, thin suggestion of day filtering in around the shutter. There is no sunbeam on the floor yet, only a softening of the dark. You roll the bedding away, push the pallets back to clear space, pull on your outer clothes. The wool is as patched as everything else, the colors faded into the same general brown-gray that most of your world wears. You wrap cloth around your head and neck, not for fashion, but for the way it keeps the wind from knifing straight into your ears. Your fingers fumble with ties made clumsy by cold and roughened by work. Then you step out toward the fields that are not yet fields in the way you need them to be. Now they are strips of wet, stubborn earth that must be persuaded to open. The plow waits, its wooden beam darkened by years of weather and sweat. The iron share is dull with mud from yesterday, will be bright again only where it meets stone. The animal harnessed to it stands patient or restless, depending on its nature and its treatment. You take your place behind, hands on the worn handles, feet set in the churned path. The first cut into the sod is always a shock, even if you have felt it 100 times. The blade bites, the earth resists, then turns in slow, heavy folds. The smell of it rises up, damp and raw and oddly alive, a smell that carries both work and hope. Your shoulders feel the pull as you push down, guiding, correcting, keeping the line as straight as your eye can manage. Your boots sink, heel after heel, into the soft track left by the previous pass. Step, brace, push, breathe. Step, brace, push, breathe. This is how the year really begins for you, with cold in your bones, hunger dull but present under your ribs, and your hands wrapped around tools that will leave their ghosts in your muscles by nightfall. The land does not care how tired you are. It only answers to pressure and timing. Sow too early, and frost may still come to bite the tender tips of the new plants. Sow too late, and the summer heat may catch them before they have grown strong enough. Every furrow you open now is a negotiation with weeks you cannot see yet. By midday, when such word has meaning only because your stomach claws a little more insistently, you straighten and look back along the lines you have made. They are not perfect, but they are there, dark scars against the paler ground. Somewhere in your mind, without numbers, you are already turning them into loaves, into bowls of porridge, into the faces of the people in your house with something to eat in front of them. Late winter and early spring are like this. Not the sharp drama of storms or harvest, but the long, slow, grinding push out of scarcity toward the possibility of enough. You stand in the cold air, breath clouding, legs heavy, hands numb, and you do the only thing you can do. You go back to the plow, to the hoe, to the earth that has always decided, in the end, whether your work will be enough to let you see another year. By the time spring is properly arrived, your bones are still not sure they believe it. The air has changed, yes. It no longer bites as sharply at your cheeks in the morning. The ground, while still wet and heavy, no longer freezes into iron at night. There are birds you have not heard in months, calling from hedges that are beginning to blush green. But inside your body, it still feels like winter. There is the same slow drag in your limbs, the same hollowed-out place under your ribs that never quite fills, no matter how carefully you scrape the pot. You wake a little later than in the worst of winter, but not by choice. Light sneaks into the house around the shutter, thin and pale, but undeniably there. You can hear a drip somewhere outside where snow once hung from a roof and now falls in slow drops from a sodden eave. The air in the room no longer stings your nose with visible frost, but it is far from warm. When you push the blanket back and stand, your first breath still comes out as a faint ghost in front of your face. The fire is easier to wake now. The wood, though still precious, is less reluctant to catch. You coax the embers with the same careful breath, fold in small sticks, watch the thin orange tongues lick upward more quickly than they did a month ago. The smoke rises into the rafters in its familiar way, carrying the smell of char and old soot to join the layers already there. Around you, the others in the house are stirring too, but there is less grumbling than before. Spring is work, but it is a kind of work that feels like movement towards something, not just away from cold. Breakfast is still more about calculation than appetite. The loaf on the table is smaller again. You can see the curve of the bottom of the bread chest more clearly with each passing week. When you cut slices, the knife meets resistance not only from the thick crust, but from whatever has been mixed into the dough to stretch the flour. Ground peas, coarse bran, perhaps things you would not have called bread in better times. The slices are thin by habit now. Your hand no longer even thinks to cut them thick. In the pot, today's pottage is more water than substance. You stir in the last of yesterday's grains, the lingering scrapings that clung to the sides. You add a handful of chopped wild greens that someone brought in from the hedgerows. Nettles, young and tender, dandelion leaves, bitter but filling. A few other plants whose names you know more by sight than by sound. The smell they give off when they hit the hot water is sharp and green, different from the soft heaviness of cabbage or root vegetables. It is the smell of survival, more than of feasting. Everyone eats quickly, more from necessity than greed. The small bowls warm cold hands again. The bread softens slightly in the thin broth, easier to chew, tricking your mouth into feeling like there is more of it. Your stomach responds with a brief, grateful heaviness. But you know from these past weeks that the feeling will not last. Spring is known as the hungry gap for a reason. Last year's stores have been worn down by winter. This year's food is still only seeds in a sack and hope in the ground. Today, the seeds must leave the sack. You take the small bag in your hand with more care than you would give to most things in the house. It is not heavy. That is what makes it precious. The dry grains inside rattle softly, an unremarkable sound to anyone not living your life. To you, it is the future. Outside, the world looks different than it did in late winter. There is still mud, plenty of it, but the color of it has changed. It is not just the dull, dead brown of thawed earth. There are threads of green at the edges of the fields, hints of growth in the ditches. The trees along the lane have small buds at the ends of their branches, like knuckles stretching after a long sleep. Birds hop along the turned soil, eyes sharp for worms and stray seeds. A reminder that you are not the only one hungry in this landscape. The plowing is mostly done now. The long strips of land lie open, rows of dark soil waiting. Your task today is to walk each one with the seed bag against your hip, turning its contents into a scatter of life across the furrows. You step down into the first strip, boots sinking slightly, and the smell of damp earth rises again, rich and deep. Sowing is simple in theory. You reach into the sack, take a handful of seed, and throw it in an even arc so that the grains fall more or less regularly across the prepared ground. In practice, it is an exercise in restraint and judgment. Your hand wants to be generous. Your eye reminds you that the strip is long and the sack is not bottomless. Toss too much seed at the beginning, and you will have nothing left for the far end. Toss too little, and the harvest will be thin, no matter how kindly the weather behaves. You fall into a rhythm. Step, step, scatter. Step, step, scatter. The seeds leave your hand in a light, ticking spray, small bodies described by small arcs, then disappeared into soil and shadow. Now and then a gleam of pale grain catches the light for a moment before it vanishes. It is like throwing away everything you have in order to keep something later. Your stomach clenches a little each time you see a kernel bounce off a clod and roll into a crack. Everything in you that knows hunger wants to pick it up and put it in your mouth. Everything in you that knows fear of the future tells you no. The work goes on. Strip after strip, field after field, the pattern repeats. Other figures move in their own sections, backs bent, hands making the same motions you do. Now and then, when you straighten to ease the pull in your lower back, your eyes meet someone else's across the distance. The expressions are all variations on a theme: tired, concentrated, quietly anxious. There are no jokes shouted across the rows today, no songs. The air feels too thin for that, as if every word should be saved for prayers. By late morning, the ache in your shoulders has become a constant background hum. The hand that reaches into the seed sack feels the roughness of the grains more sharply with each handful. Your fingers rub against the fabric, against the kernels, until the skin grows sensitive, then numb. When you pause, the silence of the field presses in, broken only by the distant cluck of hens or the murmur of voices from someone working closer to the village. You eat when the sun is high enough and your body insists. There is no shade yet. The trees have not filled out their leaves. You sit on the edge of a furrow, boots muddy, and take out the small piece of bread you brought with you. It looks even thinner here in the open air than it did on the table. You break it in half anyway, fingers careful, and maybe pass a piece to someone working near you. The chewed mouthful is dry, but the water from your flask helps it down, tasting faintly of wood and metal and the well. When you go back to work, the field seems larger than before, but so does the sky. A pale sun is pushed through the clouds, offering more light than warmth. It throws your shadow long across the ground in front of you, stretching your hunched figure into something taller and thinner than you feel. As you walk, you move through your own shadow, sowing from head to toe and beyond. A reminder that everything you do out here is about more than this hour or this day. By late afternoon, the seed sack hangs limp against your side. The last handfuls are measured out with almost exaggerated care. You do not want to be left with an awkward few kernels in the bottom that cannot cover even one more row. But you also do not want to reach the end of a strip with your hand grasping empty cloth. When the final grains fall, they do so without ceremony. No one marks the moment but you. The field looks no different than it did in the morning. Long, dark lines of turned earth, no green, no visible change. Only you and the others know that the difference now lies hidden beneath the surface, scattered and waiting. You walk home with lighter hands and heavier thoughts. The village has the same shape it always does, the same roofs, the same smoke, the same barking dog, but it feels balanced on the edge of something. All that you had left from last year now rests in the ground. All that you will have this year depends on what happens to it. Rain and sun, frost and worms, blight and birds. All these are your partners and your enemies now, in ways you cannot control. Back in the house, the familiar smells close around you again. The fire, the wool, the bodies, the pot. The evening meal is not much different from the morning's. The same bread, a little more stale. The same pottage, perhaps a little thicker if someone managed to bring home a few more greens, or a little thinner if the day ran long and there was nothing extra to add. You eat with the same quiet concentration, the same awareness that each bite is part of a story much bigger than your hunger. The story of whether your household will make it through to next spring. Later, when you lie down on the straw that pricks through the cloth, muscles humming with the day's labor, you feel the weight of each seed you carried in your palm. They are no longer in the sack, no longer something you can touch or count. They are out there in the dark, under soil cooling in the evening, under sky that might be kind or cruel. You have done your part, walked the rows, fought the urge to eat what you needed to plant, trusted the earth with what little you could spare. Spring, for you, is not a season of flowers and feasts. It is the hardest bargain you make all year. To go hungry now, so you might not starve later. To work when your body is weakest. To put your hope into grains you may never see again as anything but bread in someone's hand. You close your eyes with that bargain still heavy in your thoughts, listening to the house settle around you. And sleep comes not as a reward, but as a temporary forgetting while the seeds dream in the cold ground outside. By the time summer truly settles over the village, the cold that once lived in your bones has been chased out, not by comfort, but by heat and work. You wake before the sun has lifted itself fully over the horizon, not because anyone calls you, but because the light itself creeps in and taps your eyelids, and because your body has learned that long days require long hours. The air in the house is different now. It is still thick, still smoky, still full of the smells of wool and bodies, but there is less bite to it. When you step out from under the blanket, the floor is cool rather than freezing. Outside, a pale band of color stretches along the edge of the sky, promising more light than you will know what to do with. You move through the same motions as always, coax the fire back from its slow red breathing into bright flame, fetch water from the well, cut the hard bread, stir the pot. But the feel of each action has changed. Your hands are cracked in different places now, the skin along your fingers rough from ropes and tools rather than from cold. Your feet, when they slip into your shoes, find dust instead of frozen mud. Breakfast is hardly richer than it was in spring. The bread is still dark and dense, though at least it is newer now, made from the first grain that could be spared. The pottage is a little greener, filled with whatever the garden and hedges will give you. Young cabbages, leeks, beans climbing up rough sticks, herbs that someone has coaxed into a corner of soil. You eat quickly, not because you have more food, but because you have less time. Daylight is too valuable to waste sitting by the hearth. Stepping outside, the world feels bigger than it did in winter. The sky has pulled itself high and wide, a vast, pale dome that will turn harder, bluer as the day grows. The fields that were only lines of dark soil when you sowed them are now a patchwork of textures and shades. Here, grain stands in green waves that sway when the slightest breeze finds them. There, beans clamber up poles, leaves broad and heavy. In another strip, flax lifts its delicate blue flowers like scattered bits of sky brought down to earth. Your path to the fields is lined with life that does not care whether you planted it or not. Tall grasses, flowering weeds, insects that rise in brief clouds when you brush past. The air is full of sounds that would have seemed impossible in winter. The constant buzzing of unseen wings, birds shouting at each other from hedges, the distant low of cattle calling across the common. The work waiting for you now is less dramatic than plowing or sowing, but it is no less necessary. It is work that fills all the gaps in the day, that seems to grow back as soon as you cut it away. You start with the weeds. They are always there, pushing up between the ordered lines of your crops, greedy for the same light and water. You drop to your knees, fingers digging into the soil, and begin to pull. Some plants come easily, roots sliding free with a small, sharp satisfaction. Others cling, tearing off at the surface and leaving their hidden parts behind, ready to sprout again. As you clear space around each stalk of grain or each bean plant, you can feel the sun beginning to press its hands onto the back of your neck. The cool freshness of dawn retreats quickly. Your clothes, already damp from the dew that clung to the plants, soon grow damp for another reason. Sweat trickles down your spine, soaks the linen at your chest, stings a little where salt finds small cuts and scratches. You wipe your forehead with the back of your arm and leave a streak of mud behind. Standing up to stretch your back, you look over the field. To someone who has never done this, it might seem as though nothing has changed. The same rows, the same green plants, the same dirt. But you can see the difference. Here, where you have worked, the crops have room to breathe. There, where you have not yet reached, the weeds still press close, a tangle of unwanted leaves stealing strength from the soil. The day lengthens. Once the worst of the weeding is done, there is always something else. You might mend a broken fence post where animals have leaned too heavily. You might walk the boundaries of your strips, checking for gaps in the hedges that could let wandering livestock into your precious grain. You might be sent to watch over cattle or sheep on common land, a long, slow task of walking, shouting, throwing the occasional clod of earth at a stubborn animal that wants to wander where it should not. If you spend the day watching animals, the work is no less tiring for being less obviously heavy. You trudge along behind them, eyes always scanning. Are any limping? Is any beast behaving oddly? Is there a patch of field they must not enter? The sun climbs higher and higher, and there is little shade. You might find a tree to sit under for a short while, back against the bark, eyes half closing as the animals crop the grass nearby. But even that rest is not pure. Your ears remain pricked for the hollow sound of hooves on the wrong soil, for the raised voice of another herder calling a warning. When midday comes, you sit on the ground, whatever the ground is, rough grass, warm dirt, a patch of stones. You take out your bit of bread, harder at the edges now that the morning is past, and whatever else the house could spare. A small piece of cheese if the animals have given enough milk, an onion to bite into with a sharp crunch, a few leaves from the garden wrapped in cloth. The water you drink from your flask is no longer icy. It is the temperature of the air, which by now feels like a warm hand holding the whole world. The heat continues to build. In the fields, the air seems to shimmer above the bare soil. In the lanes, dust rises under your feet, coats your legs, sticks to sweat. Flies are more determined now, drawn to your eyes, your mouth, the damp patches on your clothes. You swat them away without thinking, hands moving on their own while your attention stays on the work in front of you. There is always more to do than daylight, even in summer. Some days you help stack hay, lifting forkfuls of cut grass and carrying them to build great, careful heaps that must be shaped just so or risk mold and rot. The smell of hay is thick and sweet, almost intoxicating, clinging to your arms and hair. Your muscles protest each lift, but the thought of animals with nothing to eat in winter sharpens your effort. Other days, you find yourself in the kitchen garden, hoeing between rows of vegetables, tying up drooping bean vines, pinching off the worst of the pests between finger and thumb. The garden is closer to the house, but it does not belong to women alone. Everyone's hands are needed here. Everyone's stomach will feel the cost if the plants fail. As the afternoon leans into evening, the light softens a little, though the heat lingers. Shadows stretch long, making the fields look striped. Your body, driven like a plow animal since morning, begins to send louder messages of protest. A sharp twist in your lower back when you bend, a dull ache in your knees when you straighten, a stiffness in your neck when you turn to answer someone calling your name. You do not stop because of these things. You slow, perhaps. You take shorter tasks. You tell yourself, just one more row, just one more bundle, just one more bucket. When at last you are allowed to turn your face toward home, the sky is still bright. Summer does not let you hide in darkness early. The village looks hazier now, edges blurred by heat. The sound of voices carries differently in warm air. Laughter from a doorway, the argument of children, a baby's wail all float more easily. Your own steps feel heavy on the packed earth of the lane, each one leaving a faint puff of dust behind. Inside the house, the fire is lower than in winter. It does not need to push back fierce cold now. It only needs to cook. The air inside is close, saturated with the smell of whatever has simmered in the pot for the last hour. Beans, perhaps, thickening in their own starch. Pieces of cabbage gone soft and translucent. A bit of meat, if some has been spared, though that is still not everyday food. The taste of the evening meal is much like the taste of the morning one, and the one before that. Bread, stew, smoke. But there is a difference now. When you look in the sacks in the corner, they are fuller than they were. When you lift the lids off small barrels, there is something in them. The green outside the house has begun to turn into food inside it, slowly, quietly. You eat with the same steady concentration as always, spoon rising, bread tearing, mouths chewing. Your body drinks in the warmth and weight of the food like dry soil drinking a brief rain. Conversation is, if not lively, at least less weighed down by constant worry. People talk about how tall the grain is now, how many beans seem to be forming on each vine, how the fruit on someone's small tree looks this year. There is still fear. There is always fear that a storm will flatten everything or a sickness will sweep through. But for now, there is also the simple satisfaction of seeing work become growth. When you finally lie down for the night, the straw under you feels almost cool after the heat of the day. Your skin still hums with the memory of the sun, a faint ache that is both discomfort and proof of effort. You can feel the lines where your clothes rubbed you raw, the places where grit has settled into tiny scratches. As you close your eyes, your mind does not leap ahead to winter yet. It drifts instead over the long, bright ribbon of the day you have just lived. The green of the fields, the weight of the hay, the taste of warm water, the hum of insects, the ache of muscles used to their limit. Summer, for you, is not a lazy, golden pause. It is the longest stretch of work in the year, a time when your body is asked for everything it can give, under a sky that offers plenty of light to see what still needs doing. Sleep comes quickly, like a stone dropped into a deep pool. And the last thing you feel before it closes over you is the faint, stubborn satisfaction that, for today at least, you and the village have kept up with the demands of the land. By the time harvest comes, the fields you have watched for months feel almost like another part of your own body. You know, the way the grain leans in the wind, the exact color where green has given way to gold, the sound of ripening heads brushing against each other when a breeze crosses them. You have walked alongside these plants since they were nothing but a faint line of green on dark soil. Now they stand tall enough to hide a child, heavy enough at the tips that they bow under their own weight. By the time autumn has settled fully over the village, the bright rush of harvest has dulled into a quieter, heavier kind of work. The fields that once stood high around you are mostly bare now, stubble fading from gold to a tired brown. The air has changed again. When you step outside in the morning, it has weight and edge. It smells of damp earth, of smoke, of leaves beginning to rot where they lie in ditches. When you breathe in, you can feel winter somewhere just behind the wind. Not here yet, but close. You wake as you always do, to the same low ceiling of smoke-dark beams, the same smell of wool and ashes and bodies. But the way the blanket feels over you has changed. In summer it was something you pushed aside in the night. Now you pull it higher, clutching at what warmth you can before you finally throw it back. The floor beneath your feet is cold again, but not with the sharp, bitter cold of deep winter. This is the first warning. Cold that slips into your toes and climbs, not to hurt you yet, but to remind you that the season of light is ending. The fire is banked low, a dull red under ash. You coax it up with practiced hands, adding small wood, then larger, feeling the heat push into your face with a different kind of gratitude than in summer. Behind you, someone coughs. Someone else rolls over on the pallet. Breakfast is the same shape as most mornings, bread, pottage. But the bread now is new bread, made from grain that you remember cutting, threshing, carrying. The crust is thick and hard, the inside dark and dense. But when you break it, crumbs fall with a softness that the stale loaves of late winter never have. You know the grain did not arrive in the bread by magic. It has passed through your hands at every stage. The cutting in the fields was only the first step. Now, in autumn, you spend long days on the threshing floor, turning sheaves into piles of loose seed and straw. The threshing floor is usually just a flat, hard space, packed earth or wood, inside a barn or under some simple roof. The air there smells of dust and old straw, of sweat worked into timber. The sheaves you once set carefully in neat stacks are now dragged or carried here, armful after armful, and laid out in a thick layer. You take up the flail, that awkward pair of wooden pieces joined by chain or leather, and feel its familiar weight in your hands. Threshing is simple, like so many things you do. Lift, swing, fall, lift, swing, fall. The free end of the flail comes down onto the spread sheaves with a muffled thud, knocking grain free from husk and stalk. You move along the circle or line, hands and shoulders rising and falling. At first, each swing is careful, aimed. After a while, your body finds its own rhythm. You feel the pull in your upper arms, the growing warmth in your back, the sting in your palms where the handle rubs. Dust rises around you in a faint, golden cloud. Fragments of chaff, bits of broken straw, tiny skins from around the grain. It sticks to your sweat, clings to your eyelashes, settles in your hair. When the sheaves have been beaten enough, you stop and let the dust settle. The floor is a tangle of broken stems and loose grain now. You gather the straw aside, pitchforks and hands lifting it into new stacks for bedding or fodder. Beneath it, the heavier seeds remain, mixed with chaff and fragments. These have to be cleaned, separated, persuaded into being something that will store rather than rot. On a day with some wind, you might carry baskets of the mixture outside. The sky above is often a pale, washed-out blue now, the color weather wears when it is thinking about changing. You stand where the breeze can find you, lift the basket, and pour the mix slowly from one container to another. The wind fingers through the falling stream, catching the lighter chaff, tossing it sideways and away in thin, pale clouds. The heavier grain falls straight down, ticking into the lower basket in a steady, satisfying sound. Pour, catch, pour again. Your wrists ache from the angle. Your eyes follow the line of falling kernels, looking for stones or larger bits that must be plucked out by hand. Slowly, very slowly, the grain becomes clean enough to store. You carry it in sacks or baskets to whatever place your household has for such things. A corner of the barn, a raised bin, a chest made for this single purpose. Each time you tip a load in, you hear the grains rush and settle, the sound somewhere between rain and sand. The level rises, bit by bit. You look at it with eyes that have learned to measure without numbers. Is this more than last year? Less? Enough? You know also that not all of it will remain yours. There are dues and tithes to pay. One part must go to the Lord whose land you work, another to the church whose priest speaks of souls and salvation, and more practically has a tithe barn waiting. On certain days, the village seems to turn itself inside out, everyone carrying in the same direction, sacks over shoulders, baskets on hips, children helping with loads just small enough for their arms. You walk that path too, feet scuffing over ground worn by generations doing the same thing. At the tithe barn, you join the small line, watch as each offering is measured, recorded in someone's mind, if not on paper. You feel the weight of your own sack as you lift it and pour, the stream of grain leaving your hands, falling into a communal heap that looks, annoyingly, more generous than your own. A tenth, they say, belongs to God, though it feels very much like it is going to the man who stands nearby, watching. You do not argue. No one does. Not here, not aloud. You shoulder the now lighter sack and walk home, feeling both relieved, some duty discharged, and slightly thinner inside, as if the subtraction were not only of grain, but of safety. Autumn is not only about grain. It is also the season of slaughter. Animals that cannot be fed through the winter must be killed while there is still enough warmth and smoke and salt to preserve their meat. The day a pig is killed, the whole village seems to know it by smell alone. If it is your household's turn, you wake knowing what is ahead. The pig is taken. It squeals loud, and then suddenly not. There is blood, bright and shocking against the dull earth, caught in bowls to be used, not wasted. Your hands are red up to the wrists before long, warm slickness drying into tight, stiff patches on your skin as you work. The animal is opened, cleaned, divided. Meat is cut, fat is trimmed, organs are set aside for those dishes that must be eaten soon. Salt, precious and expensive, is brought out in larger quantity than at any other time of year. Your fingers pinch it, rub it into strips of meat, pack it around pieces that will sit in barrels. The crystals bite small wounds on your skin, a sharp sting that you ignore. Hams are hung from beams, strings biting into their weight. Strips of meat are smoked over slow, smoldering fires, the air thick with a smell that makes your mouth water even as you work. Sausages are stuffed, skins slippery under your fingers, coils of future meals hung to dry. You know, as you hang each piece, that these will be the small treasures of winter. Shavings of fat dropped into a pot to enrich a lean stew, a slice of bacon on feast days, a bone simmered long to coax out the ghost of meat long since eaten. You look at the beams and hooks now burdened with hanging shapes and feel a kind of grim comfort. Whatever else happens, you will have a little more than just bread and roots when the snow comes. Roots, too, are gathered and stored. You pull turnips, carrots, parsnips, beets from the ground, their tops limp and yellowing. The soil clings to them. You knock the worst off, but not all. Some dirt is a kind of protection. They are carried in baskets to pits or cellars, laid down in layers, covered with straw or sand, arranged so that rot in one will not spread too quickly to the others. You run your hand over the piles, feeling the cold, firm shapes under your fingers. Each one is a meal, or part of one. Hours of warmth in a bowl on some distant winter evening. Around the house, preparations multiply. Roofs are checked for missing thatch, weak spots where rain and snow might seep in. Doors are patched, shutters mended. Gaps where wind once slipped through with only annoyance are stuffed with moss, rags, any scrap that might block a draft when the air turns truly bitter. Firewood is collected and stacked. Logs, branches, bundles of brush. Each piece represents time spent bent in the woods, axe in hand, or hours dragging loads on aching shoulders. You look at the pile, at its height, its neatness, and subconsciously compare it to the mental picture of last year's. All the while you keep counting without numbers. Grain, meat, roots, wood. Mouths in the house, days in a winter that might be long or short, kind or cruel. You have no way to know which it will be. Memory supplies both sweet and bitter examples. One year when the snow came late and left early. when stores lasted and even had a little left by spring. Another when storms came early and stayed, when even the careful went hungry and the careless suffered worse. In the evenings of these autumn days, when you come in from threshing or stacking or digging, the house feels more crowded than before. Not with more people, you live with the same faces, but with more things. Sacks line the walls. Strings of onions and garlic hang from beams. Herbs dry in bundles, their scent sharp and comforting when you brush against them. Meat casts its own heavy smell from the rafters. The pot on the fire smells richer. Occasionally, as someone dares to cut a small piece of something new into it, you sit closer to the hearth again, now that the evenings are colder. Your hands, which spent the day in heavy work, find smaller tasks, mending clothes that must last another season, twisting straw into ropes, patching worn spots on shoes. The light from the fire is enough for such things, just if you hold your work in the right place and narrow your eyes. Conversations circle back to the same topics. How much was brought in this year? Who has paid their dues? Whose pig was fattest? Whose cow has gone dry? Stories of past autumns are told too, half to warn, half to distract. Years of plenty and years of disaster, strung together in quiet voices. When you finally lie down, the air in the house smells of smoke and stored food and wool, wrapped around you like another blanket. The straw under you is the same rough straw it has always been. But your body carries new marks now. Bruises from lifting sacks, a lingering ache in shoulders from the flail, small cuts and salt-stung cracks on your hands from the slaughter. You close your eyes and behind your lids you see not the day's work, but the piles and hangs and stacks that are the result of it. A bin of grain with its gently sloping surface, a row of hams, a dark pit filled with sleeping roots, a heap of firewood against a barn wall. Autumn for you is a season of putting away, of turning months of labor into quiet, waiting security. It is also a season of reckoning, of seeing plainly what you have and what you do not. As sleep comes, slow but steady, you listen to the wind outside, to the first dry leaves scratching their way along the lane, to the soft creak of beams under new weight. You breathe in, long and slow, tasting smoke and the faint tang of curing meat. For tonight at least, you can say, we have done what we could. What happens next, weather, sickness, chance, you cannot bend with your hands. You let that thought go, the way you have let go of grain into the ground and into bins, and let yourself sink into the dark, quiet place where days blur and only the slow ticking of the seasons remains. You wake on the first day of cutting with a different kind of tired already in you. It is not the dull, constant fatigue of spring hunger or the slow ache of summer weeding. It is something sharper, edged with urgency. You know, as everyone in the village knows, that this is the narrow window when the year can be made or broken. Rain, wind, or early storm could flatten what stands. It has to come in, and it has to come in fast. The house feels almost as tense as you do. People move more quickly, fewer pauses between tasks. The fire is coaxed into life, but no one lingers near it. Breakfast is eaten standing or perched briefly on a stool. Hard bread, a bowl of yesterday's thickened pottage, maybe a scraping of fat or a bit of cheese if there is any left from the summer milk. The bread tastes slightly better than it did in the hungry months, but you do not really notice. Your mind is already out in the fields. The sickle hangs where it always hangs, but it seems to gleam differently in your hand today, even if the metal is dull and dark from years of use. The curved blade fits against your palm, handle worn smooth where countless hands have gripped it in the same way. You run a stone along the edge in long, patient strokes, listening to the faint rasp. Sharp enough, but not so thin it will chip on the first tough stalk. Tools, like bodies, must be kept in that narrow place between too soft and too brittle. Outside, the air is cooler than it was a few weeks ago. The sharpest heat of summer has gone, but there is still warmth. The light has changed more than the temperature. It is lower, more golden, making everything look richer and more fragile at the same time. The fields are no longer green seas. They are deep, heavy gold, each head of grain full and bowed. When you walk into them, they whisper against your legs and hips, seeds brushing cloth, leaving faint dust on your skin. You take your place at the edge of your strip. Others stand along theirs, forming a loose line that stretches across the field. For a moment before anyone begins, there is a strange quiet. The wind stirs the stalks, the sky stands wide above you, and the grain waits. Then someone bends, someone else follows, and the whole line folds at the waist like a wave. Reaping is work that uses your whole body but looks, from a distance, like almost nothing. You bend, left hand reaching out to gather a handful of stalks, fingers closing around them just above the ground. The right hand brings the sickle in a smooth, practiced arc, blades sliding through the stems with a dry, tearing hiss. The cut stalks fall into your left hand, and you lay them down in a neat bundle, heads together, before reaching out for the next fistful. Bend, grasp, cut, lay. Bend, grasp, cut, lay. At first, you are careful, checking each motion, making sure the cut is clean, the bundle tidy. Very soon, your thoughts move elsewhere, and your body continues without needing to be told. Your lower back protests the constant curve, your thighs burn from the repeated half-squat, your shoulders feel the weight of each handful. You know that by nightfall your whole body will be one blunt ache. You also know you will get up and do the same thing tomorrow, and the day after, until the last strip is bare. The sound of harvest is its own kind of music. There is the soft hiss of sickles through stalks, the rustle and sigh of plants falling and being gathered, the low grunts and breaths of people working. Now and then someone straightens and stretches with a groan, bones cracking like kindling. Someone else might call out a few words, an observation about the crop, a quick joke, a reminder to keep the line straight, but there is not much talking. The work is too urgent for long conversations. Words cost breath, and breath is needed for lifting, bending, carrying. Behind the front line of cutters moves another set of hands. These are the binders. They walk with arms full of straw or reeds, tying the fallen stalks into sheaves. Hands move quickly, gathering the cut grain, wrapping it around with its own kind, twisting, tucking ends in so the bundle will hold. Knots are not elaborate, just sure. Sheaf after sheaf is made and set upright, heads together like small, orderly troops waiting to be marched home. As the day goes on, the field changes face. The tall, waving sea becomes a bristling forest of stubble, cut short and sharp, with ranks of sheaves standing in clusters. In places where the workers have moved, the ground is strewn with stray stalks, seed heads knocked loose, leaves torn free. Children, the very old, and those whose bodies cannot manage the main work go behind everyone else, gleaning. They stoop to pick up the dropped ears, the scattered grains, fingers nimbler than they have any right to be after so many hours. You know, watching them, that the line between enough and not enough can be the width of their small hands. Midday comes, not as relief, but as a necessary pause. You straighten up, your spine complaining audibly, and look along the field. The line of bent backs has moved forward, leaving behind a wide strip of cut land. You can measure the morning in the emptiness where grain once stood. You sit where you are, on the prickly stubble, and take out your food. Today it might be a little better than usual. Sometimes during harvest, people are a fraction more generous with bread, with a slice of bacon, with a gulp of weak ale that has been carried out in a clay jug. There is a feeling, small but real, that effort must be fed if it is to continue. The sun is high now, heat pressing down again. But it feels different than in the height of summer. There is a faint edge in the air, a hint in the breeze that nights will soon be cooler. You wipe sweat and chaff from your face, feeling the grit against your skin. Dust clings to everything, your clothes, your hair, the inside of your nose and mouth. When you swallow, you taste not only bread and fat, but also the fine powder of crushed straw. Work does not wait long. Soon you are up again, bending, cutting, binding, carrying. The bundles, once they are tied, must be gathered and moved. You lift sheaves into your arms, the rough straw scratching your wrists and forearms, the weight pressing into your chest. You walk them to the edge of the field where carts or sledges or simple piles wait. Then you go back for more, over and over. Each armful is a piece of the winter to come, a fraction of security. As the light slants lower, turning the cut stubble into a field of copper needles, the pace does not slow much. If the weather holds, you might stop before full dark. If clouds are gathering, if the wind smells of rain, you may stay until the last shred of light is gone, working by feel more than by sight. You know how easily a sudden storm can knock the grain down, drive water into the sheaves, turn all this work sour with rot and mold. When the day finally releases you, the sky is streaked with the colors of evening, gold fading into pink, into deepening blue. You walk home with your whole body humming like a plucked string. Your arms feel as if they are still holding sheaves, your fingers still curl around phantom stalks. Bits of straw cling to your hair, your clothes, your skin. Chaff has found its way under your shirt, into your shoes, everywhere. You brush some of it off without much effect. The house, when you step inside, feels almost like another person who has worked all day. The air is thick with the smell of cooking. A stew richer than usual, perhaps, if someone has taken advantage of the slightly more generous mood to throw in an extra bone or scrap of meat. People sit in their usual places, but sink deeper, backs curved, shoulders drooping. The talk, if there is any, is low and slower, but the lines around mouths are different. They are tired, but not in the way of hopelessness. There is a thread of something like satisfaction running through the exhaustion. You eat with both hands and with your whole attention. The spoon from bowl to mouth, the bread torn and dipped, the warmth sliding into the emptiness your labor carved out. The flavors are the same as they are on most days, but your body receives them differently. It is as if it recognizes the grain in the stew as cousins to the grain you cut, as if there is some wordless understanding between the field and your belly. Afterwards, when the pot is scraped and the fire banked, there might be, on some evenings, something that feels almost like celebration. A jug of ale passed one more time than strictly necessary. A scrap of song half recalled, a story about some harvest from years ago when things went terribly wrong or surprisingly well. Laughter comes more easily when you are too tired to guard your face. It rises, brief and rough, then falls back into comfortable silence. When you finally lie down, the mattress feels both harder and more forgiving than usual. Your back complains as you settle, then slowly unwinds. You can still smell the fields on yourself, straw, dust, sun. Your hands, curled loosely near your chest, bear tiny cuts and bruises that you did not have time to notice as they happened. Your nails are rimmed with dirt, and your fingers remember the shape of the sickle handle. You close your eyes, and the inside of your eyelids is full of the day's images. A line of bent backs moving across a field, the neat rows of sheaves standing like watchful figures, the way the light turned each grain head into a small torch before it was cut. Harvest for you is not one brief moment, but a series of long, crowded days, each one asking the same question of your body. Can you give a little more? Just a little more, so that there will be something to eat when the fields are bare and the world is white again. Sleep comes slowly tonight. Not because you are not tired, but because your muscles keep echoing the day's motions even as you lie still. Bend, grasp, cut, lay. Lift, carry, stack, return. In the half-dream space before you sink all the way down, you walk another row, tie another sheaf, carry another armful. Somewhere, beyond the walls of your small house, the cut grain stands piled. the promise of winter stacked against the uncertainty of weather and fate. You have done what you could. The rest, as always, is out of your hands. By the time winter sits fully over the village, the world has shrunk. In summer, your days felt as wide as the sky, stretching from early light to late dusk, full of fields and paths and distant hedges. Now, most of your life fits inside the space between the hearth and the door. The cold outside is not just a chill that nips at your fingers. It is a steady, deliberate presence that seeps into everything and waits for you on the other side of the wall. You wake in the dark again. Not the soft, almost morning gray of spring, but a heavy, unarguable dark that feels thick even with your eyes open. The blanket over you is no longer something you tuck around your shoulders for comfort. It is something you cling to with both hands, reluctant to give up its borrowed warmth. The air above your face is sharp, thin. When you breathe out, your own breath hangs in front of you as a pale cloud for a moment before disappearing. The straw under you has grown flatter since autumn, pressed down by months of sleep. It creaks when you shift, and you can feel the harder lumps more clearly now that your body is tired all the way into its bones. Around you, other bodies are stirring, but more slowly than in summer. No one springs up in winter. The first movements are small. A hand rubbing at a face, feet testing the cold of the air outside the blanket. Someone drawing their knees briefly up toward their chest before letting them drop again with a soft thump. The floor that your feet finally find is not just cold, it is ruthless. The chill crawls up through the soles of your feet, into your ankles, up your calves, until your whole lower body feels like it belongs more to the stone or beaten earth than to you. You move quickly because moving is the only thing that makes the cold hurt less. You cross the few steps to the hearth, shoulders hunched, wishing you could wrap your whole self in the thin layer of wool you have thrown over your shift. The fire has almost gone out. On the surface, there is only ash and the faintest suggestion of yesterday's logs. You kneel on the hard floor and pull the ash aside with the iron poker, searching with your eyes half closed against the fine gray dust. Then you see it. The small, sullen glow of an ember, hidden deep within. You cup your hands around it, as if protecting a tiny animal, and you blow, long and steady. Your breath is warm, the ember answering with a slight brightening. You feed it thin twigs and bits of dry brush kept carefully from the wet, and little by little, flame stirs. It is never as quick or as generous in winter as it is in summer. The wood is colder, the air drier. But in time, you have a small, determined fire, and the room tilts a little more toward bearable. Breakfast is thinner again. The sacks that looked reassuring in autumn are lower now, their sides softer when you press them. The bread on the table is still made from this year's grain, but the loaves have stretched over more days than before. More bran, more pea flour, whatever fillers you can add that will hold together in an oven. When you cut into the crust, it does not yield easily. The crumb inside is dense and a little sour. You slice carefully, thinner than your hunger would like, weighing each piece by eye as much as by hand. In the pot, the winter pottage is a quiet thing. Dried peas or beans, a few shreds of cabbage that kept better than others, a piece of root that was starting to soften and needed to be used. On better days, there is a bone from the autumn slaughter, simmered again and again until it gives up every last trace of itself to the broth. On worse days, there is only water thickened with a handful of meal and the ghost of flavor from the last meal cooked in the same pot. The steam that rises when you lift the lid is worth almost as much as the food. For a moment, when you breathe it in, your face is warm and smells of something other than cold and wool. Winter work is different. The fields lie mostly empty, their stubble hidden under a crust of frost or snow. You do not walk out there every day now. The land is not ready for you, and you have nothing to sow. But that does not mean there is nothing to do. The tasks that waited patiently in warmer months now step forward and demand their share of time. You mend everything. Clothes, first of all. You take tunics roughened by summer sweat and autumn rain, turn them inside out, and patch the worst places. Elbows, always. Knees. Hems where mud and wear have chewed at the threads. You pick your way through fabric with a needle, the metal cold between your fingers at first, warming slowly as you work. The thread is rough, your stitches small but not pretty. This is not about beauty. It is about making cloth hold together for one more season. You mend tools, too. A cracked handle on a hoe must be patched or replaced. A loose head on an axe must be wedged tight. Rope that is frayed gets spliced back together. Knots like scars where the fibers refuse to stay whole. These repairs are done in the dimmer light near the door, or just outside if the day is dry, breath rising in front of you as you work. On some days, you go to the woods, if they are close enough and if the snow is not too deep. Wood always runs lower faster than you think it will. Bungles that looked large in autumn shrink with each night of fire. You walk with others along narrow tracks between bare trees, boots crunching frost, the air still and thin. Axes ring against trunks, sharp sounds that carry far in the cold silence. Branches fall, twigs snap underfoot. You lift and drag and carry, shoulders burning under the awkward weight of logs and bundles of brush. Your fingers, even wrapped in whatever scraps of cloth you have, grow numb and then sting as blood returns when you set the load down. Water is more stubborn now. The well does not freeze solid, but the bucket, the rope, the edges of the stone all carry ice. Your hands stick slightly to cold wood. The first scoop from the bucket at home sometimes has a skin of ice you must break. You hold the ladle long enough to drink, and your teeth ache with the cold as the water passes them. There are no cool, refreshing drinks in winter, only necessary ones. Animals take more care. Their food must be rationed as carefully as your own. You 4K from the stacks in the barn, each forkful a reminder of summer days spent cutting and drying. You break the ice on troughs, listen to the creak of leather and the snort of breath as beasts drink. Sometimes, if the winter is bad and stores are shorter than you hoped, you watch the animals eat with a calculation you do not voice. Which will be kept? Which might have to be slaughtered early. Illness moves more easily now that everyone is inside more often. Coughs echo off the walls of small houses. A single sneeze becomes a whole family lying under blankets, bodies too hot and too cold at once, bowls of thin broth untouched at their sides. The air in the house, never truly fresh, grows heavier with each breath, each fever. You wipe noses, foreheads, bowls. You stir the fire, not just for heat, but because its light feels like proof that something is still alive and moving. Days are marked less by the rise and fall of tasks in fields, and more by the small repeated cycle around the hearth. Feed the fire, stir the pot, mend the shirt, check the stores, knock the snow from the threshold, sweep the floor where dried mud and ash have mixed into a new dust. You move through the same few steps over and over, the house and yard becoming your whole world. Time blurs. Morning gray and evening gray are not that different. The light that squeezes in around the shutter is weak and brief. On some days, clouds press so low that the world never really brightens at all, only shifts from black to deep, dirty white. On other days, the sky is clear and hard, the winter sun shining on snow so bright it makes your eyes water, but giving almost no warmth. There are still small markers. The sound of the church bell on certain days muffled by snow. A saint's day that calls you to stand in a cold nave, breath of the congregation rising like mist. A rare, clear night, when you step outside briefly and see stars, sharp as ice points above, more than you could ever count, crowded into a sky that feels closer than in summer. In the evenings, when work has folded into the smallest possible tasks, people draw close to the hearth not only for warmth, but for company. Stories are told more often in winter. There is less else to do, fewer hours in the field to leave you too exhausted to listen. Someone speaks of winters past. The year the snow was as high as the window, The year the river froze so hard carts crossed it as though it were a road. The year sickness took 3 houses in a week. These stories carry both warning and comfort. You survived those years, or your parents did. Perhaps you will survive this one, too. Food, always, is at the center of your thoughts. Each time you open a bin of grain, you gauge the slope more closely. Each time you reach into the root pit, your fingers count more carefully how many firm shapes remain. Each time you cut a strip of dried meat or cheese, you trim it a little thinner than you might want to. Hunger is not always sharp in winter. Sometimes it is a low, constant emptiness that you carry with you like an extra layer of clothing. You're used to it, but your body never quite stops asking. When you finally lie down at night, the cold waits for you, even under the blanket. The heat from the fire rarely reaches all the way to the palate. You press yourself closer to whoever shares your bed, stealing warmth from their back, their stomach, their legs. Air escapes in little huffs from under the covers, quickly chilled. You pull your knees up toward your chest, tuck icy feet under someone else's calves, feel them flinch and then settle. You close your eyes and listen. The soft crackle of the last embers, the occasional pop as a log shifts. The wind outside scratching at the walls and roof. The layered sound of other people's breathing, some smooth, some ragged with cough. You think briefly of spring, but not as a picture of flowers or birds. You think of it as slightly less cold water, as one more mouthful in the pot, as the feel of earth instead of frozen mud under your boots. Winter, for you, is not one dramatic storm or one festive night by the fire. It is this slow, steady endurance. Waking in the dark, moving through the same narrow arc of house and yard, measuring fuel and food, mending what would otherwise fall apart, holding on, quietly, until the light begins, almost imperceptibly, to return. By the time you have lived through enough seasons to know their moods, you realize that the village is not only fields and food and cold. It is also the people who move through those spaces with you, the way their lives bump against yours and then drift away again, like branches rubbing together in the wind. Daily survival is made from grain and wood and water, but it is held together by all the small ways you belong to others, and they belong to you. You notice it most on the days that are not quite ordinary. Not great feasts that bring the whole year to a halt, just the quieter, local days when work bends a little to make room for something else. A saint's day, when the bell rings a shade more insistently. Market days, when the lane fills with faces you do not know. A wedding that spills out from one house into the street. A funeral that draws everyone toward the church without needing to be called. On a morning like that, you wake, as you always do, to the same smoke, dark beams, the same scratch of wool at your throat, the same heaviness in your limbs. The tasks waiting for you are the same: fire, water, bread. But there is a different color to people's movements. Someone hums a scrap of a hymn while they stir the pot. Someone else pulls out a slightly better shirt from the chest, smoothing its creases with a palm. You reach for your own clothes and choose the least stained, the least patched, the ones that make you feel a little less like a moving piece of earth. When the bell rings, it passes through your body as easily as it passes through the walls. The low metal sound gathers up the loose threads of the village and draws them toward the same place. You walk the familiar path to the church, not alone, but as part of a slow river of people. Boots scuff on packed earth. Skirts whisper against legs. Children are tugged gently back into line when they wander ahead. You recognize everyone. The neighbor who always walks a little faster. The old woman who mutters prayers under her breath. The boy who tries to look important because today he carries a candle. Inside, the church is larger than your house, but it still feels crowded. Bodies fill the space, carrying in the smell of cold air and wool. You find your place as you always do. Not because anyone tells you, but because that is where you have always stood, and where your parents stood, and where their parents did. The priest speaks, his voice rising and falling in the same patterns you have heard since childhood. The words change with the feast, but the flow of them does not. You bow your head, kneel, stand when everyone does. You cross yourself when they do. Your mind wanders and returns, wanders and returns. Like a dog that roams but never goes so far it cannot hear its name. After the service, outside in the cold light, people do not go straight home. They linger. Conversations knot and unknot in the churchyard and the lane. You catch fragments as you pass. A cousin's illness, a rumor about the Lord's steward, the price of salt in the nearest town, the weather on the other side of the hill. Someone claps you on the shoulder, asks after your grain, your mother, your cow. You answer with the small, careful honesty that life has taught you. Enough, you say. Not too bad. We manage. The words are plain, but underneath them runs the quiet hope that whoever listens will remember you when you need a favor, a loan of a tool, a bit of news. On market days, the village feels larger than itself. You wake to the same straw mattress, but when you step outside, the world is already busy. Strangers' voices mix with those you know. Carts stand at odd angles along the lane, wheels muddy, horses stamping. Some people have walked from other villages before dawn, bundles on their backs or on simple sledges dragged over the ground. They carry things you do not see every day. Pots from a distant town, fine cloth too rich for your purse but still beautiful to touch. Dried fish that smells of a sea you have never seen. You move among them with a different kind of tiredness. Your hands, used to carrying grain and wood, now lift things to judge their weight, their sound, their strength. A pot tapped with a fingernail must ring just so. A knife must sit right in your palm, blade sharp enough to bite your thumb if you test too carelessly. You have little to trade, but what you have is precious. Some eggs, perhaps, or a measure of grain, a small wheel of cheese, a bundle of flax. You tend your coins like seedlings. One lost, one badly spent, is not just metal. It is food, warmth, safety shaved away. Even if you buy nothing, market days press new sights and sounds into your mind. A traveling singer stands on an overturned bucket and sings a song about a war you have only heard of as a distant rumor, or about a saint whose miracles grow more elaborate with each retelling. Children crowd close, mouths open. Grown people let themselves stand still for a few verses, leaning on their staffs, letting the rhythm of the song carry them away from their own worries for a moment. A peddler unwraps a scrap of bright cloth, colored deeper than anything your village can make, and for a heartbeat you feel as though you have opened your eyes under a different sky. Then the cloth is folded away again, and the world shrinks back to its usual palette of browns and grays and soft greens. Not all gatherings are allowed to be noisy. When someone dies, the village moves with a slower, heavier rhythm. You hear the news in the way people speak. Low, flat voices, fewer jokes, more silences. You stand in a house that smells of tallow and cold and grief, hat or hood in your hands, fingers twisting the fabric. The body lies in the same room where the person ate, slept, scolded, laughed. Neighbors come and go, leaving small offerings of food that no one is hungry enough to eat yet. You say the same words others say. God receive them. We are sorry. But what you really give is your presence, your willingness to stand in that room and breathe the same heavy air for a while. You follow the bier to the churchyard, boots moving in time with those around you. The coffin, if there is one, is plain wood. If there is not, the body is wrapped in cloth, carried on a door. Earth waits, dark and chill. The priest speaks of heaven and dust and sin and mercy. You think of the person as they were, laughing at harvest, scolding a child, coughing last winter. Then they are lowered into the ground, and clods fall on the lid or the cloth with a sound that makes everyone flinch, even those who have heard it many times before. You go home afterward and look at the faces around your own hearth with new attention. Life feels thinner for a day or two, more fragile, as though a single wrong breath could break it. There are happier days, too. A wedding turns the village inside out in a different way. Bright bits of cloth that live most of the year folded safely in chests are brought out and tied around waists, shoulders, hair. The bride and groom, whoever they are, look both proud and overwhelmed, caught between childhood and whatever comes next. You remember your own wedding, if you have had one. The feel of your best clothes against your skin, the pressure of hands pushing you gently toward the door of the church, the way the village's eyes sat on your back like a cloak. The feast after is rarely grand by noble standards, but it feels rich to you. Trenchers of bread are laid out, pots of stew set in the middle of boards or on the floor where people sit. There might be meat more plentiful than usual, ale poured more than once. You eat and drink and feel the rare sensation of not having to count each bite in your head. At some point, someone starts a song, and others join. Their voice is rough but enthusiastic. For a little while, the worries that usually sit like stones in your stomach are washed back by this tide of shared warmth and noise. Through all of this, markets, masses, funerals, weddings, other presences loom at the edges of your daily life. The lord and his hall at the edge of the village, whose steward counts rents and whose men sometimes ride through, armor creaking, horses' breath steaming in cold air. The priest who speaks of your soul and also of your duties. The reeve or headman who knocks on doors when work must be done for the manor, when roads must be cleared, when a bridge must be mended. You feel their power in the way people lower their eyes when they pass, in the way conversations falter and then change direction when certain names are mentioned. And yet, most of the time, what holds you up is not fear of them, but the net of smaller ties. The neighbor who lends you a tool when yours breaks. The woman who comes to sit with you when a child is sick, bringing herbs and stories and a pair of steady hands. The man who helps you lift a log into place without being asked because he remembers you helped him at harvest. These are not grand gestures. They are small, constant exchanges, like the trading of embers from one hearth to another when a fire fails. As the year turns, these patterns repeat. The same bells ring, the same markets fill and empty, the same cycle of joy and loss move through the same narrow lanes. You grow older inside these rhythms, almost without noticing. One year you are the child watching from the edge of the crowd. Another year you are the one carrying the candle, the basket, the beer. At night, when you lie down on the same straw in the same house that holds other breathing bodies close, you can feel, if you let your mind be still long enough, the quiet presence of all these ties. The village does not sleep as one thing, but as many small sounds. A cough in one house, a door creaking in another, a dog barking down the lane, the far-off echo of the river under ice. You are just one person here, one set of hands, one stomach to be filled. But you are held in place by a web of obligations and kindnesses and shared work that stretches from door to door, from season to season. Daily life, you realize, is not only about how you work and eat and endure the cold. It is also about how you stand shoulder to shoulder in the church on a feast day, how you nod to a stranger at market and listen to a neighbor's grief, how you raise your voice in a song you do not quite remember all the words to. These small, repeated acts are as much a part of survival as the grain in the bin or the wood by the door. And as your eyes close and sleep begins to pull you down, it is not only the weight of the blanket or the warmth of the fire that reassures you, but the memory of all those other lives brushing lightly against yours, season after season, making your narrow world feel just wide enough. There is a moment every year that is so quiet you could almost miss it if you did not know how to listen. It does not come with trumpets or bells, not even with a sudden change in the air. It comes in small things, in the way the frost melts a little earlier on the shaded side of the house, in the way the mud at the edge of the path is just a touch softer under your boot, in the way the morning dark is not quite as heavy when you open your eyes. You wake as you have woken on 1,000 other mornings, to the rough rasp of wool at your throat, to the smell of smoke and bodies and old straw. Your back aches in familiar places. Your hands feel stiff until you flex your fingers. For a few heartbeats, winter is still all you know. Then you notice that the cold in the air above your face is not as fierce as it was a few weeks ago. Your breath still shows when you exhale, but it is a thinner cloud, fading quicker. Somewhere inside you, a small, cautious thought whispers, "It is changing." You push back the blanket and let your feet find the floor. The boards or packed earth are still cold, but they no longer bite. They press instead of stabbing. At the hearth, the embers are as they always are in the morning, dim and hidden, but the ash around them is not frozen hard. You stir it aside and coax a flame out of the red heart, hands steady. When it catches, the little tongue of fire seems brighter than usual, not because it is different, but because you are. You have been so long in the narrow tunnel of winter that any widening feels like light. Breakfast is still thin. The grain bin is low. The root pit is emptier than you would like. The bread you cut is a little darker, stretched with whatever you could grind into it. The pottage in the pot is more water than solid. But you have lived through the worst of the cold, the days when frost formed in the inside corners of the house, when your breath hung in the air like smoke even at noon, when every trip to the well felt like a small battle. Those days are behind you. For this year, at least. You step outside and the air meets you differently. It is still cool, but there is a softness under it, like a cloth with a second, gentler layer beneath the rough one. The ground is a mess of old snow thawing into patches of dull brown, and of mud that pulls at your boots, sucking and squelching. It is ugly in its way. Dirty piles of ice, broken twigs, last year's leaves glued to the earth. But your eyes read it as a promise. Under the cold sludge, the soil is waking. You look toward the fields, those long strips that have been white and then gray and then just flat for so many weeks. At first glance, they are no different. Furrows softened by snow and thaw, patches of standing water in the low places, the remains of stubble poking up here and there. But if you walk closer, if you crouch and look, you can see the first hints of green in some spots, shy and small, pressed close to the earth as if afraid to be seen. Weeds, maybe. Grass. The beginnings of something you sowed months ago, finally daring to show its face. Work shifts again. The heavy winter tasks, wood dragging, constant mending, guarding the fire like a fragile treasure, begin to share space with the old routines of the growing year. You still patch clothes and ration food, but you also start to clear. Debris in the yard is swept into piles and burned or carried away. Tools are brought out into the light, inspected with a more hopeful eye. The hoe, the spade, the broken-handled rake that must be mended before it can scratch new lines in the soil. Your body remembers, before your mind is fully caught up, how it feels to lean into the first digging. The earth near the surface is still heavy and wet, but underneath it, if you push the spade in deep enough, there is a different feel. A coolness that is not frozen, a resistance that is alive. You lift and turn, watching clods break apart. Old roots come up, pale and dead-looking, and you cast them aside. Your shoulders complain at the unfamiliar motion. But in a different way than in winter, this is not the slow ache of holding on. It is the sharp reminder that you used to do this, and will again. Seed that was saved carefully in autumn, watched jealously through the hungry months, comes out now, measured into small bags, little pots, the palms of your hands. Each grain feels heavier than its size, weighted with all the hope and fear you do not have the language to say aloud. You walk along your strip, hand dipping into the bag, fingers loosening the seed in a steady scatter. The motion is as old as you are, over and over and over. In that soft, repetitive movement there is a strange peace, like prayer. You speak not with your tongue, but with your whole arm. You know, now, what this year might hold, because you have seen so many like it. There will be days of easy work, and days when the sky feels like a lid pressed too low. There will be rain that comes too late or too early, and days of perfect weather that you will barely notice, because you are busy inside them. There will be insects where you do not want them, and weeds where you never planted them, and small, quiet joys that slip between the bigger, heavier tasks. The taste of the first fresh green after months of roots and dried things. The feel of sun on your neck the first time you work without a hood. The way laundry smells when it is dried outside instead of beside the fire. You will move through all of it, much as you have moved through the year you just finished. Getting up when the light or the cold or the bell calls you, doing what your hands know how to do, eating what there is, sleeping when you cannot keep your eyes open any longer. From the outside, it would look repetitive. From inside your own skin, it is a thin path you walk, carefully, one foot in front of the other, weaving between scarcity and enough, between sickness and health, between anger and patience, between being alone and being held up by the people around you. Sometimes when you pause for a breath on the edge of a field or stand in the doorway of your house for a moment while the pot simmers, you let yourself see the year as a circle instead of a straight line. Winter folding into spring, spring into summer, summer into autumn, autumn back into winter. There is comfort in that, even as there is also a kind of trap. You know that your life will almost certainly stay inside this ring, sowing, weeding, harvesting, storing, enduring. There will be no far journeys across oceans, no great halls full of rich fabrics and silver plates, no songs told about you in places where no one knows your name. But here, in this small, smoke-stained world, your work matters in ways that are solid under your feet. When you coax fire from ash on a freezing morning, someone's hands will be warm because you did. When you cut and bind grain in the heavy days of harvest, someone's stomach will be a little less empty in March because you did. When you sit up at night with a coughing child, holding a cup to cracked lips, someone will see another spring because you did not lie down and close your own eyes. Year after year, you survive by a combination of things so ordinary they rarely feel worth naming. The way you tie a knot, the way you judge the sky, the way you count grain without numbers, the way you remember who helped you last year and who you must not forget to help this one. Lords and priests talk about God's will, about fate and fortune. Those may be real, but down here, close to the ground, it is your own tired hands and the tired hands of people like you that turn seasons into survival. As the new year settles in, not with fireworks, but with the soft, persistent drip of thawing snow, you feel the same rhythm beginning again beneath your feet. Dawn, chores, work, food, sleep. Spring sowing, summer sweat, autumn gathering, winter counting. It can sound dull when spoken aloud, like a song with too few notes, but inside it, there are 1,000 tiny variations. A new scar on your hand, a new wrinkle at the corner of a neighbor's eye, a new child in the house, a new empty place at the table. One evening, when the days have grown just long enough that you are not lighting the fire in full dark, you sit on your usual stool and let your hands rest for a rare moment. The light coming through the small opening in the wall is thin but real. Dust motes drift in it, turning slowly. The pot over the hearth mutters quietly to itself. Outside, someone calls a child's name. A dog barks once, then lies down again. The year ahead still feels heavy, but not impossible. You breathe in, slow and deep, filling your lungs with the familiar mixture of smoke and wool and earth and people. You breathe out, and for a heartbeat you feel the whole village breathe with you. Fields, fires, animals, neighbors. This is your world. It is small and hard, and sometimes cruel, but it is also steady in its way. The seasons will turn whether you watch them or not. Your task is simply to walk with them, step by patient step, and to keep your own small flame burning from one year into the next. Then you rise, pick up whatever tool or bowl or bundle is waiting, and go back to it. The day is not finished. The year is not finished. You are still here.